Good afternoon. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and to our Douglas and Sarah Allison Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those who join us on all of these occasions on our heritage.org website and those who will be joining us on a future Book TV program. We would ask everyone here in-house to check that cell phones have been turned off as a courtesy to our speaker. We will post the program on the Heritage homepage following today's presentation for everybody's future reference. And as always, our internet and other outside viewers are welcome to send questions or comments simply emailing speaker@heritage.org. Hosting our guest today is Derek Morgan. Derek is our Vice President for Domestic and Economic Policy. He leads the Institute for Economic Freedom and Opportunity. He serves as he is a lawyer by training. He served in all three branches of the government, including on the senior staff of Vice President Richard Cheney before coming to Heritage. Please join me in welcoming Derek Morgan. Derek?
Thank you, and thank you everybody for coming, for bearing the weather outside, which I'm sure probably has something to do with fossil fuels, right? You're going to address that? Okay. 100%. Okay, right. And for our location change, it's very good to see you all here. Welcome. We believe in free markets at Heritage, not just because it works best overall for human flourishing, though that would be enough of a reason to support it. It's also moral. It's the free market system, one that respects private property, rule of law, and freedom to contract. That encourages each person to find something that they can do or produce that will be beneficial to other people. Every time you make a purchase, both sides profit. Both sides are better off. You multiply that mutually beneficial exchange by billions every day, and you get a little bit of a sense of the magic of the free market. I mention that because oil, coal, and natural gas producers are making their customers much better off. If you doubt that, think about the lives of many of our fellow human beings who do not have access to plentiful and expensive fossil fuels. The villager in Africa who burns dried dung to heat his home. The farmer in India who uses an ox to plow his field. And the elderly woman in Ethiopia who walks miles each day to fetch her water. Inexpensive energy would help them, and it helps us in so many ways. But we here in the U.S. and in the West often take it for granted that we'll have electricity and gasoline to make our lives comfortable and productive. That's great, you might be thinking, well, it lasts, but aren't we running out of these resources? Well, thanks to human innovation, new supplies of coal, oil, and natural gas, especially natural gas recently, have been found. And those who warned about peak oil and diminishing resources were astonishingly wrong. America has more than 500 years of coal at current use rates, and we're the world's biggest producer of oil and natural gas, more than Saudi Arabia or Russia. We actually have plenty of these fuels. Well, shouldn't we transition to new fuels, you might be thinking? Well, maybe, if we can find a better source of energy, one that's less expensive and just as plentiful. The left wants to make these oil, coal, and natural gas resources more expensive, so their preferred fuels will be used instead. The problem is that the cost of energy is reflected in everything you buy. Everything that's transported or made by machines or made by using electricity, which is just about everything. And of course, higher energy prices are especially bad for the poor, who spend more of their income in energy. Okay, wait. It's all fine and good, you might say, but what about the environment? Well, inexpensive energy and the development that goes with it leads to cleaner environments. The cleanest countries in the world, those with the best environments, are those that have the highest economic freedom score in Heritage's own Index of Economic Freedom, as my colleagues Jim Roberts and Ryan Olson have written. And let's look at the United States briefly. According to the EPA, since 1980, carbon monoxide is down 84%. Ozone is down 33%. Lead is down 92%. And sulfur dioxide is down 81%. Cleaner air is it's much cleaner now than when I was a boy, for example. Okay, but there's just something icky about fossil fuels, some might think. It can't be moral to use them, can it? Well, it can, and to answer that question, we have with us today Alex Epstein, the president and the founder of the Center for Industrial Progress. Alex has debated some of the biggest names on the environmental left. His writings have been published in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Investor's Business Daily, and dozens of other publications. He's a Duke graduate, and he's the author of today's book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Alex Epstein.
Hey everyone, I recognize some of you. So I had an experience about 5 years ago that I think really captures the way we're taught to think about fossil fuels. And actually what's wrong with, in my view, not just the way that the left thinks of fossil fuels, but often the right thinks of fossil fuels. So I'm from Southern California. I grew up in this area, but the climate out there is just amazing. So I moved there about 10 years ago for work, and I haven't been able to leave. And about 5 years ago, I was in Irvine, California, Orange County, at a farmer's market for lunch. And as sometimes happens, there was a Greenpeace booth outside the farmer's market. And this girl comes up to me. What am I now, 34, so I must have been 28, 29 at the time, looked fairly young, and said, "You're an environmentalist, right? And don't you want to help us get off our addiction to fossil fuels and transition to clean, renewable energy?" And I'm just thinking, she really does not know what's going to happen in terms of what my view is. And I said, well, no, actually, I really like fossil fuels. I think what the fossil fuel industry does is great overall, and I think that the world would be better if we used more fossil fuels. So, think to yourself, what is she thinking? What is she going to say? That's what I was wondering. And the reason why I raised it that way, and that is my view that we should use more fossil fuels, is I wanted her to bring up one of the common objections. So, for example, catastrophic climate change, catastrophic pollution, catastrophic resource depletion. And I wanted to show her that there's actually a different way of thinking about these things, where the fact that something is a challenge doesn't mean that it's a catastrophe. And that if you look at the big picture, the full context, these things, insofar as there are challenges, are far, far outweighed by the benefits human beings get. But unfortunately, she didn't ask about any of those things. And she didn't even get mad at me. She did something that at the time took me aback. And that was, she looked at me almost in awe. And I thought, what is going to happen? It can't really be awe, right? And I realized later it was as if an alien creature, she was talking to an alien creature. She looks at me after I say I think we should use more fossil fuels. She says, wow, you must make a lot of money. So, which was, by the way, definitely not the case. Certainly not. I don't even think I knew anyone in the fossil fuel industry at the time, but certainly wasn't making a lot of money from anyone. And I had the same experience this morning, in fact. I was on Bloomberg, and I decided, I'm not going to wear my usual costume, which is this. Which, by the way, I wore to the People's Climate March recently in New York City, if you want to check it out on YouTube. But that was actually less dramatic than the 3 foot by 3 foot I love fossil fuels sign that I was carrying. So those are fun things. YouTube.com/improve the planet. You can check it out. But anyway, I was just wearing this little pin. And the host, or I don't know if it's hostess, but the woman host looks at my pin. And she says, what does that pin say? And I said, it says, I love fossil fuels. And she's taken aback a little bit. And she said, well, do you love fossil fuels, or do you just love the oil industry's money? So again, you must be paid off. I said, no, I just love fossil fuels. Nobody's paying me. So why this story is so significant to me? Because it really captures what I think are the three different moral views of fossil fuels. So, and the one that we should use more, which I'll talk about last, is viewed as so out of bounds that you can't honestly hold it. But my view is that if we actually think about these issues logically, it's the only one that makes sense. So one of the conventional views is what I call the unnecessary evil view. So fossil fuels are an addiction, they're evil, they're destroying the planet, and fortunately, we have all of these promising renewable technologies to replace them with. Everyone familiar with this view? The idea is we need to get off fossil fuels, and we can get off them quickly. Now, the response to that too often, particularly by the energy industry or the fossil fuel industry, is to say, well, no, they're not an unnecessary evil, they're a necessary evil. No, they're not an unnecessary addiction, they're a necessary addiction because unfortunately solar and wind aren't going to come along quickly enough. Say, look at Shell as a recent example, the Shell oil company. They have an explicit policy on their website that Shell's goal as a company is to reduce CO2 emissions to zero. There's an oil company. And they do these little skits online about how they're going to power things by footsteps, and they just built this soccer field that is allegedly powered by footsteps. I wrote an article about that, and I calculated that it's at minimum 147 times more expensive than natural gas, their footstep solution. But this is the view that, hey, and then they're at the same time saying, hey, let us drill in the Arctic, right? But we can't, unfortunately, we can't get rid of it all now. Yes, we want our industry to expire, but unfortunately, we disagree with the environmentalists about the expiration date. But this is a view, and Derek, I forget what was your adjective? Gooey, mucky?
Just icky.
Icky.
Yeah.
Sorry, these are technical terms. So there's something wrong. So there's unnecessary evil, necessary evil, and if you hear necessary evil, think about a lot of stuff you'll hear even from the right has at least a tinge of that. Especially anytime someone says, well, we're going to move, yes, of course we want to move to solar and wind as soon as we can, et cetera, et cetera. And my view is different. So I don't believe in unnecessary evil or necessary evil. I believe in the third, which is superior good. So superior good. And superior good just means it's like anything else. It's like, like this. It's just saying, I buy this, I use this because it's the best thing available to me. It's going to enhance my life more than any of my other options. And by the way, it doesn't mean, it needs to be renewable. I plan on everyone should use an iPhone 6 for the end of time, otherwise we're not allowed to use it, right? It's not that kind of thing. It's not saying, it's perfectly clean, there's no pollution. Of course, there's mining and all kinds of other things. But what we're saying is this is a good thing and the risks and side effects are worth it and should be minimized, but they're worth it. The value that we gain is so large that it is good and we're not going to feel guilty for it. So that's the way I feel about fossil fuels. So again, it's the three moral views are unnecessary evil, necessary evil, and superior good. Make sense so far? Anyone know what this is made of? Natural gas or oil. Yeah, probably natural gas in this case. Okay. So then the question is how to get there. And wrote a whole thing on that, but I just want to give you an indication of my own journey toward this view, because I grew up in this area, Chevy Chase, Maryland. As most of you probably know, this is not exactly a fossil fuel hotbed. Both ideologically it is not, and then physically it's not. And it's not like there's a lot of fracking taking place here, or a lot of shale resource plays that people are making, or coal industry or anything like that. So I grew up, like everybody, pretty much, I think, in the Montgomery County public school system, learning nothing positive about energy, or certainly not about fossil fuels, but learning, of course, they are destroying the planet. We're running out of them. We're running out of all resources. They're polluting. That's going to only get worse. And, of course, they're causing catastrophic climate change. And I went to Montgomery Blair High School, which is a very math and science-oriented high school, and certainly my teachers were quite big into that, which had an impact on me because I come from a math-science background, at least particularly when I was younger. Then I got into philosophy. So this was my background. And so the question is sort of what changed for me? And part of what changed for me is studying philosophy, which I'll get back to later. But in terms of just subject matter, what changed for me is I studied something that I think everyone should study and almost nobody is taught, and that is the history of energy. So the history of energy. What was life like before we had cheap, plentiful, reliable energy? And what was life like after? And how did we get from one place to another? Because I had never even thought of that. And until I was maybe 25 years old, I hadn't even really thought of, in any serious way, how much better life is and how much of a role that energy plays in that. So I'll tell you the story that really influenced me was studying how we came to use oil. This was really fascinating because you think, oh, we use oil now, and people think, oh, why don't we just choose something else? As if we all got together and voted on oil, and that's why we use it. There's no logical reason why. But it's a real question of, wow, why have we used this particular substance for so long? And I was studying it, I was doing some research on Rockefeller. And to understand Rockefeller, I needed to understand, how did the oil industry come to be? How did it begin? And what was fascinating to me is that the old story I had heard about whale oil, this story about we were whaling, this is partially true, but mostly not true. We were whaling, we got all of our oil from whale oil, and then we started running out of whales, and then one day magically they discovered oil, and we've been using it ever since, and when are we going to find the next oil for our whale oil, in effect? But it wasn't true. There were actually at least 6 major competitors that were long-standing. So, for example, there was a substance called camphene, which was based on turpentine. And that had certain good properties. It was cheap to make, but it tended to be quite explosive, which is not the greatest thing for an indoor illuminant in your home. There were really interesting things like different kinds of animal oil. So there was standard lard oil, and then there was something called stearin, which was like this highly technological lard oil. And then there were different grades of whale oil. And perhaps the most promising thing was coal oil. That was actually the biggest predecessor to what we can call rock oil or petroleum. And what struck me was that in looking at all of these things, these all could produce energy. You often hear today, oh, solar and wind, they can produce energy, or they work in a lab, we can get some energy. But looking at the history, it became clear, well, it doesn't matter too much if you can produce some energy. It depends on, can you produce it cheaply and scalably? And that was a big deal. And it turned out, before that, nobody could produce it cheaply and scalably. And I don't have visuals with me here today, but has anyone ever seen those overhead maps of North Korea and South Korea at night? So one is dark, one is light. Well, this is pretty much what happened to the American countryside with oil. Because it was very expensive to illuminate your home, people couldn't afford it, so the countryside was dark at night. Think about what that means. If you lose 4, 5, 6 hours a night, let alone with that kind of day of manual labor, your life is shorter. And that really struck me. It's not just it's not just years in our life, it's life in our years. Because just as when I was reading it, maybe 26, 27, thinking about it, how many plans I had for my life and how many of those involved being able to work at night or do things at night. And they didn't have that. Their lives were effectively shorter. And then the oil industry came along. In 1859, Edwin Drake drilled the first commercial oil well in the US. And there was this quote from a New York chemist in 1864. And what he said, in effect, is, in the countryside, it used to be dark and now it's light. And that just struck me as, oh my gosh, that's 5 years. We hear today, oh, it's going to take solar and wind a long time to mature, and how long, people always ask me, how long did it take oil, because they think they know it must be 80 years or something, how long did it take oil to go from nothing to market dominance? 2 years. 2 years. And in 5 years, it was so much better. What this impressed upon me was 2 things. So one is, energy is life and death. Energy is life and death. And the more I learned about energy, the more apparent this became. And I'll just read you one quote that I love, that I use in the book. And this is, the thing to take note of is that this is coming from a time in history, this is about coal, where coal was far, far dirtier than it is even in the worst place in China today, by far. And this is how they felt about coal. Because they had encountered personally the value of energy. So, let me just... So, this was just a letter to a major newspaper. And they were worried about running out of coal. they didn't really understand how much coal there was, how technology can improve your ability to find it. So they were worried, but look at what happens when they're worried. Today, people talk gleefully about not using fossil fuels. So the guy says, coal is everything to us. Without coal, our factories will become idle, our foundries and workshops be still as the grave. The locomotive will rust in the shed, and the rail be buried in the weeds. Our streets will be dark, our houses uninhabitable. Our rivers will forget the paddle wheel, and we shall again be separated by days from France, by months from the United States. This was in Britain. The post will lengthen its periods and protract its dates. 1,000 special arts and manufacturers, one by one, then in a crowd, will fly the empty soil as boom companions are said to disappear when the cask is dry. And this is the next line is the one that I never forget. We shall miss our grand dependence as a man misses his companion, his fortune, or a limb. Every hour and every turn reminded of the irreparable loss. So at least for my part, I felt like I had gotten nowhere near the appreciation of how important energy is. And in the book, I elaborate a lot on that, but I want to just stress now that it is that important. And the core of it is that energy is, I like the term machine calories. So just like our body needs calories, so our machines need calories. But in the US, our machines do 100 times more work than we do, so they need 100 times more calories. And we need to figure out, food's pretty expensive for us. We need to figure out a way to make calories for machines that are way, way, way cheaper than food. By the way, this is why biofuels don't work. That are way, way, way cheaper than food, and that we can produce a lot of. And so the first point is energy is life and death. The second point is affordable energy is life and death. That's important, because if you can't afford it, you don't have it. So affordable energy is life and death, and affordable energy is incredibly challenging. That's the second point, incredibly challenging. And that's I call it the original alternative energy market, but the original market for oil, that's what that showed me, that it's not easy to produce something that's affordable and scalable. You have to use a lot of ingenuity. You have to find the right material, and you have to find a really good process where you can produce a lot of it. And that means when somebody says, hey, I have footstep power, isn't that great because it's renewable? My first inclination is, it seems like that's going to be really hard to do cheaply and scalably. So, you go for it, but don't take away my energy in the meantime. Feel free to try to outcompete it. But this is part of the reason why in the whole history of civilization, there are only 3 even partially scalable sources of energy that we have: fossil fuels, nuclear, and to some extent hydroelectric, which is limited by the number of sites. And nuclear doesn't really do most of the motive power things, but it does electricity. So that was really striking to me. So we have the 3 moral views, and these were the two insights about energy that I had: that affordable energy is life and death, and that affordable energy is incredibly challenging. And that led me to the last step of the journey that I'm going to talk about today, and then I want to make sure we can get questions and go into some of these details. But the last one was then looking at the modern debate. And here it was really important, I think, that my background is in philosophy. So philosophy is all about how to think logically, particularly about issues of right and wrong. And one absolute rule of thinking logically about issues of right and wrong is that you have to always look at the full context or the big picture, which means if you're considering a choice, you have to look at both the risks of it and the benefits, the negatives and the positives. And if you just look at one side, you're going to make a really bad decision. And if you don't look at them carefully, you're going to make a bad decision. And when I started reflecting on our current energy debate, it just struck me that it's bizarrely biased. Because my own education, I had supposedly gone to one of the best high schools in the country and one of the best colleges in the country, and nobody spent 5 minutes the entire time, of those 8 years, talking about the value of fossil fuels. All they talked about were these risks and side effects, in very dire terms, no less. And so that just on the face of it, my feeling was, well, now that I know all of this about energy, how valuable it is, even if all of those risks and side effects were true, which I was suspicious of given that they were biased in their whole presentation in the first place, we can't have an intelligent discussion if we only look at one side of the issue. And that then made me really interested in, well, let's actually study what's the evidence of the benefits and what are the evidence of the risks and side effects. And one thing in particular, and I talk about this in the first chapter, which is called The Secret History of Fossil Fuels. One thing that struck me in particular about the risks and side effects that nobody talks about is it has to do with the issue of track record. Whenever we're doing predictions, we have to realize predictions are very, very difficult. Like predicting the future is difficult. You think about something like the financial crisis, how few people predicted that, how many people predicted, very rosy things. It's just, life is full of these complex systems, and if you're dealing with something like an economic system or society, let alone a climate, which is arguably more complicated in certain ways, although it doesn't have free will in the same way. You have to, it's really hard. So if somebody claims to be able to predict it, if somebody's saying, hey, all these really bad things, this stuff that you're using today, the way I flew here this morning, the way your food gets here, everything in the thing that runs everything in your civilization, it's all gonna destroy and it's, the world is gonna end. In fact, the whole world's gonna become unlivable. You'd wanna know, okay, that's a big claim. How do you really know that? And even if they say, well, lots of experts agree with them, that's not too much by itself unless you really know. You have evidence that they have an ability to predict. So one easy question is, well, what's the track record? Like if people are making these predictions of catastrophic resource depletion, catastrophic pollution, catastrophic climate change, well, can we look at the track record of the individuals involved? Because that's a great tool of knowing how good somebody's thinking methodology is. So if somebody makes very extravagant, confident claims and turns out to be completely wrong, his theory may well be wrong, and he's certainly wrong about his level of confidence. He doesn't have very good judgment about that. And what struck me is the more I read this publication called Access to Energy, which is the best energy publication ever. I basically inhaled that thing. It's still around, but the main author, Peter Beckman, wrote from 1973 to 1993. So I had this advantage of, even though I was born in 1980, I read the whole history of energy and environment, like month by month, by the best guy from then to the present. But it was about 2008 or 2009 that I took it all in. And what was crazy is everyone was making all the exact same predictions back then, like the exact same predictions. So we're running out of resources. Well, they're predicting that in the late 60s and early 70s. So for example, Paul Ehrlich, who's still one of the world's leading ecologists, he was so popular, he was invited on The Tonight Show over a dozen times. I mean, imagine an intellectual today just being on Jimmy Fallon a dozen times to talk about how we're going to run out of everything. And he predicted that, England would basically be destroyed by the year 2000. And that, we'd run out of, America's economic joyride is over. That's what he said in the early 70s. And tons of people say that. And the same thing with pollution. Derek mentioned the actual stats about pollution, but people saw pollution from fossil fuels, and instead of saying, hey, is this a problem we can solve, they thought, no, there's no solution, it's going to be a disaster, we should just pack it in and stop using fossil fuels. And what I've seen and what I show in the book is that, well, no, we use 25% more fossil fuels, but pollution has gone way, way down. In addition to fossil fuels help us with environmental things like clean water, which is almost never talked about. And then with climate change, catastrophic climate change, that's often viewed as, oh, well, this is some brand new theory, but it turns out no. For example, James Hansen, the leader in world's leading media climate scientist anyway, he predicted in 1986 that the temperature between 2000 and 2010 would rise between 2 and 4 degrees Fahrenheit. That did not happen, by the way. This is very small fractions of a degree. It's been 1.3 degrees Fahrenheit since the Industrial Revolution. So what you have over and over is the people are completely wrong, and that's not discussed. And number one thing that showed me is, okay, we need to totally re-examine this issue from the perspective of, let's look at all the benefits and all the risks, and let's look at them with precision. We can't just have this bias that fossil fuels must be bad, or we can't all look at negatives, or we can't exaggerate things. We need to look precisely, because if you restrict 1 calorie of energy, you're restricting somebody's opportunity to use a machine to improve his life. So when we talk about, hey, let's restrict our CO2 emissions, that means restrict our energy use, which means restrict our progress. So if you're going to talk about that, you better have a really, really good reason. So in the moral case for fossil fuels, that's basically my conclusion. Once I do my best at, let's really look at all the evidence, look how certain different things are, look at all the positives, all the negatives, add them up, and where I get is superior good. But I think the most important thing, even more than the conclusion, is the method. So we have, as a society, the politicians like talking about we have a broken X. We have a broken method of thinking about energy and environmental issues. It's incredibly biased, and that serves nobody except for people who really just don't like industrial civilization. So I'm happy to talk about any of the issues in any kind of detail, but the point I wanted to get across today was that, again, we have a broken method. We need to really start thinking big picture about these things. And part of that is we always need to recognize that affordable energy is life and death, and affordable energy is incredibly challenging. So at this point, I'd love to take questions.
All right, I'm going to ask for you to please wait for the microphone to get to you. Just raise your hand and then say your name and affiliation. You can ask a question. I want to do one plug for one of our papers coming up, which is Steve Moore has gone back and looked at all the things that were said during the Alaska pipeline debate.
Oh, yeah.
And he's compared that to what is being said now with Keystone, and it's the same thing. All the talking points are the same, and none of them came true with the Alaska pipeline. So maybe I'll just ask you a question about the global warming issue generally. Mm-hmm. Is there anything different from the global warming agenda and, say, the environmental agenda from 1960s or 1970s, or what are the similarities or differences that you could kind of take out from that?
In how the issue is portrayed?
Yeah, and how the issue is portrayed, the aims, the goals.
Sure.
Yeah.
So that gives me the opportunity to talk about one thing that I found super helpful in coming to this issue, which goes to having a background in philosophy. I was really interested from the time, my mid to late teens, in environmental philosophy, which is really about how we think about our relationship with the rest of nature, with our environment. And what I found is most people aren't aware that there are that there are multiple environmental philosophies. You sort of think of it as, oh, my philosophy is we all care about the environment. And that way of putting it, the environment, we care about the environment, actually obscures a big difference. Because there's one viewpoint, there's really the humanist view of environment and the non-humanist view of environment. So the humanist view of environment says our goal is to maximize human well-being, and we want an environment that will do that. So if we're going to preserve a park, it's for human enjoyment. It's because it's beautiful to us. But there's another school that says, no, the ideal is human non-impact. And that means we want to impact as little as we can, even if that goes against human life. So you take something like the Anwar in Alaska is a pretty good example of this, because it's a place that basically nobody goes. It's called a wildlife refuge, but you're drilling these very small holes there. It's for everyone, for all intents and purposes, mostly a wasteland for most people. Nobody wants to go there, but people hate the idea of human beings treading there. And so that's the idea of non-impact is the ideal. And this goes to, in the environmentalist movement in the 60s and 70s, they were more vocal about this. So for example, a very bad word in environmentalism until maybe the 80s was technology. Is very, very explicit that if you're in favor of this non-humanist view of environment, you have to be anti-technology, because technology, what is technology? Technology is using human ingenuity to transform our environment for human purposes. But what happened is digital technology became so popular that it became un-PC to say I'm against technology. So they'll say I'm against development, but those really run together. I mean, they're kind of the same, basically the same thing. And do I bring this up because what happens is the viewpoint is we should impact as little as possible. And usually that's the ethics of it, and philosophy and ethics, and the metaphysics is your worldview. How does the world work? And the metaphysics is usually, well, nature is, I call it the fragile mother view of nature. So nature is this fragile mother. Nature will give us everything we want and need, but only if we don't disrupt it. Like if we mess with things too much, if we quote unquote play God, things are gonna go haywire. And this viewpoint has existed for everything, like for anesthesia, for computers. Every new technology, people are afraid that it's going to take over the world. And what they always point to is some new side effect. So with fossil fuels, there is a side effect. When you burn fossil fuels, you can get things like, sulfur can be in there, nitrogen can be in there. But the main things you get are water vapor and carbon dioxide because it's a hydrocarbon. So when it mixes with oxygen, you get H2O and CO2. And that's true, that side effect does impact the atmosphere. But what happens is if you have this fragile mother view of the world, you're going to suspect that that's not merely a change or even a challenge, but a catastrophe. And so this is the mindset that has always existed in environmentalism. This is why they're wrong about everything, because they assume all the predictions are wrong. I mean, basically without fail. But like DDT, it's man's changing things, he's making a chemical, therefore it must be a catastrophe. It was actually a catastrophe not to use it. Same thing with fossil fuels, it'd be a catastrophe not to use it. But there's this assumption of catastrophe. And to go back to the example, so it's really this philosophical bias that's driving everything. And that's why people are so out of their mind about 1.3 degrees Fahrenheit in 150 years, and they'll say some portion of it is caused by fossil fuels. Before this period, everyone in history always wanted it to be warmer. Always. But if the idea is, well, if man does it, it must be this really bad thing. And that's why they rename it climate change, even though it's just warming. And then whatever climate thing comes from warming. But and even though the CO2 level has been 10 times higher in history and life thrived, it doesn't matter. It's just this fear of man-made change. And so it's this view of the fragile mother view of nature plus the non-impact view of ethics. So I hope that answers Derek's question in the sense of the mindset has always been the same. And so there was a brief flirtation with global cooling, based on particulate matter coming out, like, stuff that blocks, and basically CO2 will sort of reflect a certain amount of heat back in, and whereas other things will reflect heat out, like, soot and that kind of thing. But in all these cases, again, it's always equating change or challenge with catastrophe, if it's man-made, and they see no catastrophe in the state of nature. Whereas as a humanist, I see a catastrophe in the unchanged state of nature. That's why if and when this, even though it's been tapering off all this stuff, it will never change. These catastrophic predictions will never change unless the mindset changes, unless this dogma about the fragile mother, because it's an unscientific viewpoint.
All right, time for your questions. We've got one in the back row. Do we have a microphone? Yep, there you go.
Hello. Well, actually, I want to ask you, when you said about those three resources, coal, you said nuclear energy, and then hydroelectric. So I just want to make sure that you consider hydroelectric as a renewable or non-renewable.
Yeah.
I just want to know your perspective on hydroelectric, because
Sure.
you never touched on it. You said solar, wind as renewable. You never said hydroelectric, which is the most massive renewable energy. It's over 7%.
Right.
That's the majority of renewable
For
is
sure.
hydro. So just want to know what's your
Yeah, good question. So first of all, just to be clear, it wasn't just coal, nuclear, and hydro. It was fossil fuels. So I'm blending together coal, oil, and gas. In terms of just the major energy sources, you can say either coal, oil, gas, nuclear, hydro, or you can say fossil fuels, which blends those three, nuclear, hydro. But anyway, in terms of hydro, why didn't I include hydro under renewable? There's two aspects of this. One is mainly because the environmentalists do not include them together. So if you look at what is impeding hydroelectric development, so let's say the world has, I'm not sure where you're shaking your head at, but if you look at what the world has in terms of hydroelectric capacity and who opposes the building of new dams, it's not conservatives. It's not libertarians. It is environmentalists. So so go to the Sierra Club website, for example. Among their list of achievements are dams that they've shut down. And this is a particularly objectionable view, given that they claim that there's a CO2-related catastrophe. So the reason I focus on solar and wind is because those are what they claim as the replacement technologies. They're usually not favorable to hydro. Now, I'm a huge supporter of hydro and discussed it at length in the book, as well as a huge supporter of nuclear. Hydro is limited, though, by the fact that there are only certain water sites that can accommodate it. Now, in terms of renewable, is it renewable? I consider renewable a useless classification. I don't think we should think, in no other industry, again, do you think of a renewable cell phone, a renewable building? The way life works under capitalism, we make progress. We're always finding new ways of doing things. So the question of what should I use for fuel or what material should I use for a book is not what can I do over and over for 1 billion years or 1 million years. The question is, what's the best way of doing this that mankind knows? And then tomorrow we want to figure out an even better way. So when I fill up my car with gas, I'm not saying, hey, this is a commitment for everyone to do this for the end of time. I'm saying this is a really good thing for us, and I welcome other people developing other things so that when I buy my next car, it can be powered by something else, whether that's methanol or whether it's compressed natural gas or whether it's some advanced battery technology. Those are great. We want whatever the best thing is. So to think of it as we want solar and wind, we should give some preference because they're renewable, that means that we're settling for something inferior on the grounds that we can have something inferior forever. But why would you want it forever if it's inferior? And it's a joke anyway, because all the materials, only one of the components is renewable, which is the sun or the wind, but all the others are non-renewable. So you're mining those. And that's the exact same thing with oil, by the way. Oil has the sun in it too. Oil is just compressed, stored solar energy. So it's what this, let's tie it back to the last point. Renewable as an ideal is not a scientific ideal. It's not an economic ideal. It's not a moral ideal. It's an ideal, or rather it's an ideal based on the idea that we should minimize our impact on the earth, that should be our goal. And so people have this very woozy idea that somehow we're living in harmony with nature and we're taking in the sun, which is complete nonsense because, of course, we have to mine the hell out of the earth just to do that, excuse my language, just to do that just as well as we would have to do other things. But it's this ideal of let's not impact things, and also the ideal, which is even worse, of let's be repetitive. That's an ideal fit for an animal, not a human being.
My personal favorite is Mr. Fusion for any Back to Future fans, the coffee maker at the back. All right, do we have other questions? Yep, we got one here in the front, and then we'll go over here to this side.
Hi, Drew Schaefer with the Heritage Foundation. In terms of regulation, as a result of very simple inherent negative externalities, what do you think of as far as cap and trade programs or taxations, or what do you think at all on that topic?
So there's two issues there. One is, do I think that externalities is a good framework for the law to operate under? And that would be no. And then two is, are there externalities or these negative externalities, particularly with climate issues? So my framework is property rights. So let's take standard pollution, then we can take something more complex like the alleged danger of CO2 aggregating in the atmosphere. In general, you have to decide at a certain point, in my view, what threshold of emission constitutes pollution and what doesn't. And there will always be a threshold, and it's very important not to set it too low, which is what the EPA is always doing, because lower is not always better. And I'll give you the example that I gave before of the guy in coal-based England in the 1800s. Imagine if they had imposed today's EPA rules or even 1970 EPA rules. Everyone would die of cold and starvation, right? So there'd be something wrong with that. And the issue is that pollution is we think of it as a rights violation where you're doing physical harm to somebody, but it's not pollution if it's something that's completely essential and unavoidable in pursuing life. So what's nice is at any given stage of technology, you can set higher and higher bars for or in a sense, lower bars for pollution because you have more technology. So today we can say absolutely it should be illegal to have the coal plants that they used to have, right? Because we have the technology. So the point is that the threshold of what is and isn't pollution is an economic and technological phenomenon. The ultimate goal must be what is the full context of what improves human life. And that goes to something like fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are the only energy technology that could possibly scale in the near future, next several decades, to provide energy for 7 billion people. So whatever you say about them, unless you can prove that the world is gonna, planet's gonna blow up and everyone will die, you can't say that these shouldn't be allowed because they're polluting, because energy is a more fundamental need than lack of pollution, or at least than super pristine environment. Super pristine environment is really only something we have in modern times, largely because of fossil fuels. Like even the caveman, he has to sit next to a fire and breathe in smoke all the time. He has no clean air paradise whatsoever. So I think that the law should define, this is a scientific technological issue, what is the proper level of emissions, and there can be all sorts of considerations like how is it affected if you're running a factory and someone moves into your neighborhood versus if you move into someone's neighborhood with a factory, right? I'd say one has a much different threshold. Like if I'm running a factory and people start moving in, they agree in a sense to deal with my factory versus I go into Chevy Chase, Maryland, with a coal plant and plunk it in the middle of my old neighborhood. It's different. So, but that's the principle. But it all has to be based on evidence, and this is where so much of the EPA stuff is really bad because it doesn't recognize. It assumes that you should just lower everything infinitely. It's called the no threshold fallacy. I talk about that in Chapter 7. They do that with nuclear too, by the way. They say, if a lot of radiation is bad, no radiation must be the ideal. Well, I'm getting radiation from potassium and him right now, and myself. Yeah, well, you guys are just a little bit less. So you have to be scientific, and that goes to the climate thing. You have to be scientific about, are people actually being harmed by this? And my favorite statistic for this is let's look at how many people are dying from climate, how many people are actually endangered by climate. And what you find, which this is really surprising to me, is that not only hasn't it increased, it's decreased precipitously. So in the last 80 years, it's decreased by 98%. So you're 50 times safer from climate than somebody 80 years ago. Last year, supposedly the worst year ever, less than 30,000 climate-related deaths in the entire world. Think about that. This is supposedly the biggest problem. Whereas in 1931, I believe, it was over 3 million, and that's with less than 1/3 the population. So that'd be like 10 million now. So what does this show us? This shows us that, and this goes back to the view of the nurturing mother. It's not a nurturing mother. It's a pretty tough mother. And so what we need to do is master nature. So the climate is naturally variable. It changes all the time. It's volatile. It changes dramatically. And it's vicious. It attacks us all the time. So what we need to do is master it. That's the thing. And to master climate, you need energy because you need to be able to control the climate in your house with heating and air conditioning. You need to be able to build a sturdy civilization. That's what really matters. That's why Chapter 5 of the book is called Climate Mastery. That's what's ignored. So again, we're so afraid that we might be upsetting Mother Nature in these tiny little ways, and we're missing the big picture that 3 billion people in the world have almost no energy, and that's why they're vulnerable for climate. So if you want to guarantee safety from climate, get people access to more energy.
You heard it here, one tough Mother Earth, right? All right, we had a couple of hands over here. Okay.
I'm Connor Ryan. I'm an intern with Mark Kirk's office. So just your thesis, I just wanted to be clear, is that pollution is bad. It's drastically overestimated in the media, but it's bad, but it's worth it for all the good it does. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Well, I mean, I think with anything in life, if you do it, you're saying that the risks and side effects are worth it. But at the same time, the risks and side effects, so you want to minimize them. So the idea is that the moral thing to do is to go forward with fossil fuel use full throttle and keep improving the technology. And at the same time, in parallel, encouraging other technologies. And by encouraging, I mean stop getting in the way of. But for example, I believe if done properly, every additional lump of coal in the system is a good thing because it's giving someone the ability to use machines to improve his life, which is a fundamental form of human opportunity, which, we need and billions of people who basically have none need.
All right. I saw two more hands here, and we'll see if we can get through them quickly. Maybe we can get to the other two.
It's my theory that Jay Lair, the Heartland Institute, it's my theory that environmental zealots are so strongly favor wind and solar because they know they can never be widespread, inexpensive, and support the population of the world, and they really do not want development. They do not want the population to grow. How do you feel about my theory?
I share it. No, because it's the non-impact ideal, and ultimately, and Jay Laird could probably should be up here more than I should, but in terms of just let me see if I can find this quote. Well, I'll paraphrase it. If you believe in non-impact, if you believe we should live a low-impact lifestyle, then you should be against energy on principle. It doesn't matter if it's perfectly clean, perfectly cheap, et cetera. And this was actually put to the test because Mr. Fusion, more or less, in the late 80s, people thought, oh, we can do fusion, which is this dream form of nuclear power, which I won't get into the technical details, but essentially it'd be unlimited, virtually free, incredibly safe. And they asked some of the top people who today claim that they're terrified of CO2, people like Amory Lovins and Paul Ehrlich and Jeremy Rifkin. Like, what do you think of this? And you'd expect, oh, great, right? We can have as much energy as we want with no side effects. No, they said this would be the worst thing. And I forget which one said this. It was either I think it was Ehrlich. Giving society this kind of cheap energy would be like giving an idiot child a machine gun. But that's how you're viewed, right? Because you're supposed to minimize your impact. Well, if I just make you as a human being 5,000 times more powerful, it's like the Incredible Hulk. Like, look how much you can change and move around. So ultimately, if non-impact is the ideal, then non-impact is the ideal. Energy is our means of impacting nature with machines. That's what it does. So 100% I agree.
And do we have, where are we next? Okay, over here, front row. And by the way, windmills have a lot of impacts, particularly on birds.
And as soon as they're practical, or if they ever were, those would be pointed out much more aggressively. And even environmentalists shut those things down already.
Yeah. Randy Randall, 60 plus. EPA has come up with this concoction called social cost of carbon.
Yeah.
Okay. But they don't talk about the social benefits of carbon.
Right.
And their costs are mainly offshore. They happen someplace else, Bangladesh, whatever. Mm-hmm. Have you looked at that, and what are your comments?
Yeah, I mean, it pretty much relates to what I said about climate. I mean, I think it's all bogus in the sense of they're all based on extrapolations from climate prediction models that can't predict climate. No, this is just the elephant in the room, but this is just a fact. I mean, everything the UN says is extrapolations from climate prediction models that can't predict climate and that they've been completely invalidated by history. These have a horrible track record. So, and you mentioned they don't look at the benefits. So it's the same kind of bias. It's a philosophical bias, not a logical error. So the public is making a logical error. That's why I focus on think big picture and why it's good to point out, social benefits of carbon. But the people coming up with these social costs are not innocent. They're anti-industrial, and they're just looking for ways to scare people.
All right, we may have time for one more, if there's any more questions. Anybody? Okay, right over here. Wait for the microphone, please, sir.
Thank you. I'm Dino Drudy. I'm just an interested citizen. But the question I have for you goes to the solution and the role that conservatives inadvertently play in the problem. Conservatives generally favor, in legal construction, deference to the agency because they don't like courts overturning governmental decisions. But deference to the agency here is carte blanche for EPA. What is your practical, substantive solution to the problems you have outlined?
Well, I mean, in terms of the CO2 stuff, it's easy. I mean, stop attacking it, stop regarding that as something that's legally actionable whatsoever. So that's easy. I mean, then there's a question of how you have the right pollution standards, and ultimately, it's a big issue. I'm much more of the view that this should be resolved, much more in courts actually, than by an agency like EPA. So that there's a really good essay in the book Climate Coup by a guy named Roger Pilon, which gives a pretty good critique of the executive state in this issue and gives a positive alternative. So I'm in that school, but it's definitely not my focus. And part of the reason it's the moral case is to evaluate what is the impact on human life and then give certain rough political guidance, but that's a guide for policymakers to say, we cannot be trying to outlaw this stuff that's fundamentally good for human life. So that's what I'm attempting to do with the book, but there's tons more work to do beyond that.
All right, well, good news. We have copies of Alex's book outside, and I'm sure you'd be happy to sign them.
Yes.
Okay, great. Please join me in thanking Alex, and thank you for coming.